A black CEO is denied boarding his own Boeing Business Jet. 10 minutes later, he shuts down the entire airport. What happens next will leave you speechless. The sky above Langston Regional Airport was a burnished sheet of late afternoon gold, the sun hanging low and heavy over the sprawling tarmac. The private terminal, separate from the clamor of the main airport, buzzed softly with the movements of polished shoes, rolling luggage, and hushed conversations. A breeze stirred the crisp flags atop the entrance, their edges snapping faintly. Everything about the terminal suggested exclusivity, a place where names carried weight and fortunes opened doors. Malik Foster stepped out of his blacked-out SUV, adjusting the cuff of his sharp charcoal suit. The pavement, warmed by the day's heat, radiated upward in gentle waves. Malik's polished shoes clicked against the concrete with a steady rhythm, each step measured and deliberate. The few porters and service staff nearby gave him polite nods, but Malik hardly noticed. His mind was elsewhere, occupied with an upcoming meeting in Zurich, the logistics of a new data center expansion, and a private dinner with investors. Boarding his jet was supposed to be the simplest part of the evening, until he saw the young security officer blocking his path. Trent Mason stood with arms crossed, a rigid figure in the sterile white glow of the terminal's overhead lights. His security badge gleamed on his chest, but his narrowed eyes spoke louder than any official credentials. He looked at Malik, or rather through him, with the casual disdain of someone who had already made up his mind. "Private aircraft access is for authorized individuals only," Trent said, his voice clipped, lacking even the basic courtesy his uniform demanded. Malik offered a calm smile, one that did not quite reach his eyes. He reached inside his jacket and handed over his boarding documents, an official authorization laminated neatly inside. "You'll find everything you need there," Malik said, his tone steady, almost polite. Trent barely glanced at the documents. With a smirk curling the corner of his mouth, he shoved the papers back into Malik's hands without looking up. "You're not authorized," he said flatly. His hand went to the radio on his shoulder. "Control, be advised. We have a trespasser at Gate 1.
Repeat. Trespasser at Gate 1.
Request immediate backup." The word trespasser echoed around the otherwise quiet terminal. A few heads turned. A woman at the coffee kiosk froze mid-pour. Two maintenance workers pretended to fiddle with a vending machine, their eyes glued to the scene unfolding. Malik's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He took a slow breath, every inch of him radiating restraint. He had fought too hard, come too far, to let anger dictate his actions now. Instead, he stepped back, giving Trent all the space he seemed to crave. Pulling out his phone, Malik dialed a number known only to a handful of people. When the call connected, he spoke two words so softly they barely stirred the air. "Initiate procedure Eclipse." The person on the other end gave no reply, but Malik knew the wheels had already begun turning. He slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket with a finality that seemed to vibrate through the very floor beneath him. Around him, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The buzz of distant engines faded. The blinking runway lights, usually a constant hum of activity, flickered once, then went out. A second later, the fuel trucks parked near the hangar's ground to a halt, their blinking hazard lights winking out like dying stars. Overhead, the distant roar of an incoming jet dimmed as the plane banked sharply, climbing away from the airport. Inside the command center perched above the terminal, alarms blared to life. Red emergency indicators flashed on screens. Confused controllers scrambled to readouts, barking into headsets as the entire network ground to a standstill. Incoming flights were rerouted mid-air. Private jets waiting to taxi were ordered to shut down engines. Panic bloomed like a storm cloud. Down below, Trent shifted uncomfortably. He glanced over his shoulder toward the glassed-in office behind the security checkpoint, where supervisors now watched with faces pale and stricken. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Malik remained still, his expression composed. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he looked, in that moment, like a king surveying a battlefield he had already won. The clatter of hurried footsteps announced the arrival of Mr. Collins, the airport director. a large man whose neatly pressed blazer could not hide his heaving chest. He barreled through the security checkpoint, his face a mixture of fear and sweat. "Mr. Foster," he gasped, his voice quivering with barely concealed panic. "Sir, please, there's been a misunderstanding. Allow me to personally escort you to your jet." Malik's gaze, calm and unwavering, slid from Trent to Mr. Collins. There was a long, stretching moment where no one dared breathe. "The first order of business," Malik said finally, his voice as cool and sharp as tempered steel, "is to remove this man permanently from any security role, effective immediately." Mr. Collins paled. Without hesitation, he barked orders into his radio. Moments later, 2 airport police officers marched forward. Trent, now stammering protests, was handcuffed and led away. The crowd of onlookers, still silent, watched the spectacle with wide, disbelieving eyes. Some captured it on their phones, the flickering screens catching Trent's red face and Malik's serene expression. As Trent disappeared from view, Malik gave a slight nod to a man who had been standing quietly off to the side. His legal aide, dressed in an unassuming navy suit. With a few taps on his tablet, the aide launched a pre-written press release. Within minutes, the news was everywhere. Langston Regional Airport under emergency investigation for discrimination blared headlines on local and national outlets. News vans barreled toward the airport entrance. Helicopters hovered above, their searchlights cutting white cones through the falling dusk. The terminal buzzed with frantic energy, passengers stranded and staff powerless to move. Malik watched it all with a detached, almost clinical interest. Not out of spite but necessity. Lessons, after all, had to be remembered, not just by one man, but by an entire system that had allowed such moments to fester unchallenged. His gaze swept once more over the terminal, over the faces watching from behind glass, over the empty tarmac, over the chaos he had unleashed not in anger, but with the precision of a scalpel. He whispered under his breath, the words meant for no one but himself. "Next time, remember the gate you're blocking might belong to the very man you're trying to deny." With a final, quiet breath, he ascended the steps and disappeared into the jet's luxurious interior. Moments later, the engines roared to life, vibrating through the ground, scattering loose papers and sending tremors through the silent halls of Langston Regional. As the aircraft lifted into the twilight, the airport, once so sure of its power, its procedures, its unspoken biases, crumbled beneath the weight of its arrogance. And Malik Foster, as always, soared above it all. Disclaimer: the story you've just watched is fictional, created to highlight issues of racial discrimination and the importance of standing up against injustice. Its purpose is to raise awareness, promote empathy, and encourage meaningful discussions about respect, equality, and accountability in all environments.